And so here's the question as we look at this passage this morning. I'd love for you to wrestle with this question. Has forgiveness actually taken place yet in the story? In those verses we just read, has forgiveness actually taken place yet? It's kind of hard to say, isn't it? I mean, at no point did Joseph's brothers, did they actually say, oh, wow, you're Joseph? Oh, hey, Joseph, I just want you to know we're so sorry for what we did. What we did was clearly wrong. It's me. Hi, I'm the problem. It's me. You know, they never say that. They never acknowledge what they did. They never ask for forgiveness. And in those verses, at any point, does Joseph actually say the words, hey, I forgive you for what you did? No. So has forgiveness actually happened? Here's what's interesting. This question is exposing something about the nature of forgiveness that I think we need to understand. It's this idea that forgiveness is our part, but reconciliation takes two people. Okay, did you know forgiveness and reconciliation, those are two very different things. We get those things confused all the time. I would say in the church almost more than anywhere else, we think those things are the same word. But forgiveness is our part because forgiveness is between you and God vertically. It's about how you allow God to become the narrator of your life story instead of them. Forgiveness is always possible. It's always possible because it's your part. You can always choose forgiveness. Reconciliation is not always possible because it involves two people. It involves two people coming back together to work through it. So here's what I would tell you. I think forgiveness has happened in this story so far. I think Joseph had done it. I think the fact that he's able to respond the way he is in this moment, he has come to a place of forgiveness for his brothers. What has not happened yet in the story is reconciliation. That's not taken place yet in the story. So I'd love if we could, just for a moment here, I'd love to just kind of pause and just reflect on how do you forgive a family member from this story? How do you forgive a family member, people who, for most of us, the hardest and worst damage that happens in our lives comes from family members. Now, this could apply to how do you forgive anyone? How do you forgive your business partner? How do you forgive, your neighbor who you're in a feud with about the dog pooping in your yard, whatever it is. This could apply to anybody, anything. But I would tell you, this story is really about family members coming to a place of forgiveness. And I would tell you, it's the place where so many of us, that's the worst damage of our lives. So the first thought here is the more intimate the relationship, the longer the process of forgiveness takes. When we're talking about some of the deepest wounds of our lives, the more intimate the relationship was or is, the longer the process of forgiveness takes. Okay, I can forgive the stranger who steals $5 from me, or the guy who cuts me off in traffic. But what about the wife who's asked to forgive her husband's infidelity again and again and again? But what about the adult child of the alcoholic, abusive parent who wants to still love their parent, wants to still have a relationship with them, but doesn't want to get caught up in the same cycle again and again, the same toxic relationship with no boundaries over and over again? What about the parent of the child that keeps lying, keeps breaking trust, keeps breaking your heart, but then whenever they're in trouble, they turn around and say, hey, Mom, can I have money? Can you bail me out again? Can I live with you guys again? The more intimate the relationship, the closer the relationship, the longer the process of forgiveness takes. We forget, we read Joseph's story in a few minutes, but years had passed between the moment Joseph's brothers did what they did to him to this moment where he's standing in front of them with all the power to either forgive or take revenge. Years and years of his life have taken place. I guess what I'm trying to say is it's okay if it's taking you a while to process through forgiveness. The closer and the more intimate the relationship, the longer that takes. Second thought here, talking and listening is progress. Right? We just said if reconciliation really hasn't happened yet in the story of Joseph, but they're talking, they're listening, there's a relational connection that's still happening. The reason I say that is because a lot of times in families, we think silence is a good thing, right? For many of us, we're like, oh man, at Thanksgiving, nobody was like screaming and yelling and throwing the table over. It was a great Thanksgiving. It was a great family visit. It was a great Christmas together because nobody got mad and left early screaming at the other family members. So we think silence is a good thing, but oftentimes unforgiveness, bitterness, those things are very quiet, actually. So some of the worst damage that's done, the worst pain that's done are actually the things we don't say. The walls we put up, the distance we put between ourselves and another family member, the way that we choose to just disengage and walk away instead of expressing our love. And so, it's okay, I would tell you, if your next step from today is just to open up a conversation with that family member. Maybe your next step coming out of here is just to reach out and just to have a conversation, just to listen and just to talk. It's okay if you don't move in one conversation all the way to forgiveness and reconciliation. In fact, I would tell you, I think a lot of times that's kind of unrealistic, putting that kind of a pressure on ourselves. Talking, listening, that's progress. That's movement toward forgiveness, even if it hasn't happened yet. And then the third thing I would say, how do you forgive a family member? At some point, and by far, this is the hardest one to do. The hardest one to do is this last one. You have to come to a place where you're willing to surrender your right to get even. You have to surrender your right to get even. We all know somebody like this, right? I literally am thinking of a guy I know right now who, man, this guy, he's very, very angry about his ex-wife and what she did to him years and years ago. And so this guy, every Uber rider who has had him in his car for 5 minutes has heard about his ex-wife. You've met people like this, right? Every person who's ever cut his hair, he sits there in the barber chair and within 5 minutes, they've heard about his ex-wife and what she did. You've met, right, after 15 minutes with this guy, and you're going to hear about that bitterness, that anger that he's carrying. Some of you know someone like this, don't you? Some of you, if you don't know someone like this, it may be because you are someone like this. Here's what's happening when you meet somebody who does that. It's like you can't even get hardly into a conversation and they're talking about it. What's happening there is over time, their anger, their unforgiveness toward that person begins to, harden and calcify into an identity. It literally becomes the very identity that we look at ourselves through. Our anger, our unforgiveness can actually become the identity of our lives. So what happens then is, even if I wanted to forgive, the fear is, man, if I forgave, who am I then? What does that mean about me if I forgive? For some people, if we allow ourselves to go so far down that path where our anger and our unforgiveness become an identity, we almost come to a place where we can't forgive because it would completely undo the very identity that we've based our entire lives on. We are our anger. We are our unforgiveness. Can I just tell you, Jesus has a way better identity for you than that. He has a much better plan for what he wants you to live into. But we have to come to this place where we're willing to surrender our right to get even. You see this in the story, what happens next. So to kind of fast forward through the next few chapters of Genesis, what happens is in the midst of this famine, Jacob and his brothers, Joseph's brothers, they all come to live in Egypt under the care of Joseph. And so it's sort of like a family reunion. Joseph is taking care of them. He's providing for them. He's protecting them. And all seems great until finally Jacob, their father, passes away. You've seen this in families before too, right? It's kind of like, oh no, mom died. Now what's going to happen? Mom was the only one keeping everybody from killing each other. Jacob passes away, and now the fact that this hasn't been reconciled, it hasn't been worked through, rises to the surface again. And so finally we find the moment of reconciliation in the story. Verse 14 of 50, it says, after burying Jacob, Joseph returned to Egypt with his brothers and all who had accompanied him to his father's burial. But now that their father was dead, Joseph's brothers became fearful. Now Joseph will show his anger and pay us back for all the wrong we did to him, they said. So they sent this message to Joseph, before your father died, he instructed us to say to you, please forgive your brothers for the great wrong they did to you, for their sin in treating you so cruelly. So we, the servants of the God of your father, beg you to forgive our sin. So this is it. Finally, this is the moment where they acknowledge that they did something wrong, where they beg forgiveness. They actually say to Joseph, what we did was wrong. Will you please forgive us? Go ahead to that. Oh, yeah. When Joseph received the message, he broke down and wept. Then his brothers came and threw themselves down before Joseph. Look, we are your slaves, they said, which, by the way, is the fulfillment of the original dream that Joseph had, if you're tracking with us. This is the moment. It didn't look anything like Joseph in his dream thought it was going to look like, but this is that moment of it being fulfilled. But Joseph replied, don't be afraid of me. Am I God that I can punish you? You intended to harm me, but God intended it all for good. He brought me to this position so I could save the lives of many people. No, don't be afraid. I will continue to take care of you and your children. So he reassured them by speaking kindly to them. So again, this is the moment of reconciliation where what we're really able to see is Joseph has completely surrendered his right to get even. But how has he done that? He had every right to take action and to right the wrongs that had happened. A key is in that verse 19, where what we were just reading. Again, what we said before, he's focusing on God's part in the narrative of his life. He's not choosing to focus on his brothers and emphasize their part in the narrative of his life. And that line he says, am I God? Am I God that I'm here in this position to punish you? Joseph recognizes it's not my job to pay my brothers back. It's not my job to bring justice to them. My job is to focus on God's plan for my life. Can we get to this place where we actually surrender our right to get even and allow ourselves to entrust ourselves to God and to entrust those who have hurt us to God, to say, am I God? My place is not here to punish you. It's not my role. That's God's job. That's hard to do. Now, here's why that matters. This whole series, every week of the series, we've been saying the same thing about Joseph. I'm going to say it again here this last time at the end of this series. Joseph's story, the reason it's in the Bible is to show us Jesus. The reason Joseph is such a central character and takes up so much of the story in the Old Testament is because Joseph points to a true and better Joseph. He points to Christ. And so when we look at the story of Joseph, we're not supposed to look at Joseph and see ourselves like, oh yeah, he's kind of like me. We're supposed to look at Joseph and see Jesus. He gives us a picture of Jesus. We're more like his brothers in the story or the other characters in the story. That's where we find ourselves. And so what we see here in this moment with Joseph is as we see Joseph points us to Jesus, that Jesus forgave us. He entrusted himself to God. I love the way Peter said it. One of Jesus' closest friends and disciples, Peter, in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 23, he's talking about the moment of Jesus on the cross. He's describing what Jesus did on the cross. He says this, when they hurled their insults at him, at Jesus, he did not retaliate. When he suffered, he made no threats. Instead, he entrusted himself to him who judges justly. He entrusted himself. How did Jesus move to a place of forgiveness? He entrusted himself to him who judges justly, which means he also entrusted who? Those who were crucifying him, you and me, those who deserved the punishment for what was happening. If we want to get out of this place of bitterness and unforgiveness in our lives, we have to move to this place of entrusting ourselves to him who judges justly. But what if I don't get to see them pay for what they did? What if they actually get away with what they did and they don't ever get punished for it? Yeah, it might happen. It's none of your business. God is the narrator of your life story. That's where your focus is supposed to be. Can you entrust yourself to him who judges justly? When we do that, what we realize is that God first did that for us. I love what C.S. Lewis said about forgiveness. He said, to be a Christian means to forgive the inexcusable in others because God has forgiven the inexcusable in you. I love that so much because it doesn't say, you know what God does is he excused the inexcusable in us. It's not what it says. But God, when we had inexcusable things, he just canceled us. No. The way that what God did is he forgave the inexcusable in us. In other words, he took upon himself, he absorbed in himself the penalty that was due us. And it's only when we realize that he's done that for us, that he forgave the inexcusable in us, that we then have the power to turn and actually offer that same forgiveness to forgive the inexcusable in other people.
Hey, thanks for watching this video. We hope you enjoyed it. Hope it made an impact on your life somehow. And if it did, don't forget to like or subscribe or share it on social media with your friends as well. We always love seeing you, and remember that you can join us live every single Sunday. So hope to see you there.